All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So welcome everyone to the Society of Thoracic Surgeons Congenital Heart Surgery Database. Actually, this is the monthly webinar, not the user group call, so I'll get that switched over. Sorry about that. So we'll get started. Go ahead and get started. On the call with me today from the STS side, we have myself and Carol Crone. We have Emily Conrad and we have Sydney Clinton. And from our consultant side, we have Chastity and Leslie, and we also have Melinda joining us today. And for our surgeon leader on the call today, we have Dr. Meyer joining us. So thank you, Dr. Meyer, for joining today. I just have a couple of brief STS updates, and then I'll turn things over to Leslie and Chastity for education. And then as usual, we'll just end things via Q&A. Please be sure to submit your questions via that Q&A function, and the raise hand function is enabled. So if you'd like, you can just raise your hand and ask your question. Just be sure that your microphone is enabled on your end. So again, super brief STS updates. The October training manual is posted, and FAQ summary is posted and out there and available for you out on the STS website. The fall 23 harvest, that includes the surgery dates of July 1, 2019 through 6/30/2023. That harvest did close on September the 15th at 11:59 p.m. Eastern. And the analysis report results will be available in the coming weeks. I don't have a specific date as of yet, so more information will be coming as soon as I know more. The spring 23 harvest, as you know, is underway. We are currently accepting data for the spring 23 harvest. The spring 23 harvest will include the 4-year surgical date period of January 1, 2020 through 12/31/2023. And that official harvest date will be coming soon. As usual, the spring and fall harvest will fall typically around the same time. I think that closed in March, mid-March, mid to end of March last spring. So just, expected around the same time, but that official date will be coming soon. And again, for public reporting, the CHSD public reporting website was last updated in September. And that official notification did go out to the CHSD community on September the 10th. That is all. Well, actually, no, I'm sorry. I do have an AQO update. Emily, please feel free to hop in if I misspeak or if you want to add anything. All recorded content is available for viewing within the platform. Just click on your presentation you wish to view, click join session. Q&A is available to watch after the presentation. Content, just know that the content will be moved over to the STS education page, I think within the next week or so. Is that correct, Emily?
Yeah, it will be there shortly. We're working on moving it over, but if you originally registered for AQO, you'll be able to view the content within that virtual meeting platform through the end of December. And then it will move over for the original attendees at the end of December. So feel free to just log back into what you already have logged into to view the content for now.
Perfect, thank you. And also, if you did not register for AQO, you will be able to purchase that virtual content. I know that more information on that will be coming soon, correct, Emily?
Yes, once it's on the virtual platform, that'll be called the AQO archive, and you'll be able to purchase that and claim credit through the end of December.
Perfect, thanks, Emily, appreciate it. And again, just as Emily had just mentioned, the deadline to complete all of the evaluations and claim that education credit is Friday, December 29th. Our AQO Hot Topics webinar will be coming in December, and I think we're meeting about that internally this week. So more details on Hot Topics will be coming soon within the next few weeks. And also just a friendly reminder that we will be back to an in-person meeting for 2024. So we look forward to seeing you all in 2024. We have not released the official site yet. Things are still in the works. So once we have everything finalized for location and everything for 2024, we'll announce that to everyone. So we're super excited. So again, look forward to seeing everyone back to in-person in 2024. All right, with that, I'm going to turn things over to Chastity and Leslie for our education. So Leslie, it's all yours.
Thanks, Leanne. Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining. Today, we are going to, based on some of the questions that came in at AQO and through our FAQs, just from chats with data managers, we thought it was a good time to sort of revisit just back to basics, give an overview of a lot of the things that we talk about on these calls, terminology, things like that, and just sort of break it down at a high level of how all of this works. And then we have just a couple quick updates at the end. Next slide. Okay, back to basics. So we will cover the following items. Case inclusion, we'll go over a glossary of terms, commonly used terms, timelines, the harvest process, and then the analysis process. Next slide. Okay, so to begin with case inclusion, as a general rule, every case done by a congenital surgeon who's included on your Schedule A should be submitted to the STS. But as a requirement that's in your contract, every cardiac case done by a congenital surgeon on your Schedule A should be submitted. And we'll get into what that means in just a couple slides. But for every case that you submit, you are required to submit every field, every time. Next slide. So what's different with our adult cases in version 6.23.2? Again, as a general rule, if you would have included them in version 3.4.1, then you're going to include them now. Ideally, we'd love to have every congenital patient having surgery at your site or within your surgeon group, depending on how you're structured, to be submitted so that we can start to get even more of our patients who, as they grow and turn 18, included in this registry. But the most important thing, we've said this over and over again, is to be consistent at your site. So if you're including every congenital patient, regardless of age or the surgeon who operates on them, do that all the time. Don't pick and choose, stay consistent. It's a good idea to sort of define that process within your hospital, get buy-in from your team or your administration or your surgeons so that you can be consistent. And to keep in mind, if you are submitting every congenital patient who has surgery by a surgeon on your contract, that might include adding surgeons to your Schedule A. So that's what we've had to do here at U of M. We are including patients who have adult congenital patients who have surgery by maybe a traditionally adult cardiac surgeon, but they're a congenital patient. We're including those in our data now, so I've added them to my Schedule A. So there might be small changes, but that's the ideal world. Overall, if you would have included them in 3.4.1, continue to do so. Next slide. Okay, to get into some glossary terms, and I've already said this once, but Schedule A, the Schedule A is the contractual list of the participating surgeons for your participant ID. So that might look like your hospital and all the surgeons who you can submit cases for will be listed there. Or it might be a surgeon group if you have like a partnering hospital and your surgeons travel back and forth. I don't know how many of those are in the congenital world, but it exists. The next term that we say a lot is cardiac cases. So a cardiac case is defined as a case with an operation type 1 or 2. Operation type 1 is CPV cardiovascular, and operation type 2 is no CPV cardiovascular. That operation type is a field that is defined within the database, and that's in the training manual and how you pick operation type and what types of things will qualify. But by and large, our cases that have stat scores that we're entering are generally op types 1 and 2. Those are the cardiac cases that we're talking about. They are not op types ECMO, op type VAD, op type thoracic, or other. Okay, episode of care. Episode of care is the time period a patient is admitting preceding and or following an operation all the way through their database discharge date. Episodes of care will start with your hospital admission date. It won't be including time periods at other hospitals or outside, but it will go through database discharge date, which might include time periods, or I'm sorry, other admissions at other hospitals. Index operations are defined as the first cardiac case of the episode of care. So again, cardiac being op type 1 or 2. The first op type 1 or op type 2 case within the episode of care is defined, that's your index operation. And then primary procedure is the procedure with the highest stat mortality score of an operation, considering the rules and exceptions. And we'll get into that a little bit more as well. But of all the different things that we do within the operative setting, the primary procedure is the procedure with the highest stat mortality score while considering all of the exceptions. Okay, next slide. So to go in a little bit more detail about episode of care, again, this is the time period the patient's admitted preceding and or following your operation through database discharge date. Next slide. So as an example, we have a patient who's admitted for a Norwood operation, and they're admitted at your hospital from birth until post-op day 30. Next slide. Then we discharge them to an outside hospital, maybe closer to home, until post-op day 190. Next slide. And then they come back for their Glenn operation, and that's from post-op day 190, until 210. That's post-op from the Norwood. Next slide. And then we discharge them again back to the outside hospital until post-op day 225. Next slide. And then they're readmitted back to your hospital for observation. And then finally, we discharge them to home. So all of these little bubbles, the Norwood, the Glenn, and then that readmission for observation, all of those will have the same database discharge date, which is that discharge to home at the very end. So that means that they all represent, they're linked by their database discharge date, and that makes them all part of the same episode of care. Next slide. So your episode of care encompasses that from birth for the Norwood, before they have their Norwood operation, all the way through to the point where they're discharged to home. Next slide. Okay, index operation. This is the first cardiac case of the episode of care. Thank you. Next slide. Regardless of the sequence of operations. So yes, it's the first cardiac case, but let's get into an example of what I mean by that. Next slide. So say your patient is at your hospital and they are cannulated to ECMO. Next slide. And then we decannulate them from ECMO and put in a VAD. And then they have a VAD procedure, another VAD procedure, and then finally they have their heart transplant and we take out the VAD. So in order to know which of these would be the index operation, we need to look at the op type for each procedure. Next slide. Which is hard to read, sorry about that. So the first is op type ECMO. We've only cannulated to the ECMO, that's op type ECMO. Then VAD, another VAD op type, and finally op type CPV cardiovascular. That one is the index operation, because it is the first cardiac case, meaning op type 1 or 2 of their episode of care. Next slide. Okay, primary procedure. So as an example, like I said, the primary procedure is the procedure within all of the operations that occur with the highest stat score considering the rules and exceptions. So for instance, your patient has a Norwood, a Sano shunt, and a PDA closure. So you're going to look at Appendix C, thank you, to find out the stat scores. This also may be available in your software depending on your vendor, but Appendix C is the sort of gold standard for these. And you look at the yellow column with the new stat mortality score and stat mortality category. And based on that alone, you can see that Norwood has the highest score. Next slide. And then, like I said, we're going to, I think I missed one, sorry. So we're going to consider, there we go, thanks, Leanne. The highest stat score, that's the guiding principle, the overall rule, highest stat mortality score is your primary procedure. But like I mentioned, we need to consider the rules and exceptions. So we're going to look through the analysis overview and all of the rules for determining the primary procedure to make sure that there are no other exceptions that may be applicable for this case. The very first one is a procedure-specific factor rule, and this takes up a few pages in the analysis overview, but it will list out the procedures that qualify, and lo and behold, next slide, Norwood will be on this list as well. For this example, Norwood does have the highest stat score. It is a procedure that has procedure-specific factors And so it will be your primary procedure. But in general, there are 16 exceptions to the rule, and you do need to go through and make sure that your procedures, you're looking at each procedure code and each exception to make sure that you're selecting the right one. Next slide. Okay, so we've determined that Norwood is our primary procedure. Next slide. Okay, more glossary terms. Training manual, we talk about this a lot, or you'll see it documented as TM. That is like the definitions manual, the data dictionary. This is the document that has all of the definitions and the coding guidelines for each and every field in the database. Analysis overview is the document explaining how analysis was performed on that harvest period. So this will include your combination codes, primary procedure rules and exceptions, inclusion and exclusion criteria. It is the sort of summary of how analysis was performed for that particular harvest. And that is released close to or with the publication of the STS reports. Appendix C, I mentioned as well. This is a list of all of the procedures with stat mortality scores and then their stat mortality category. And then the data collection form, or DCF. This is the paper document. I believe it's like 87 pages now, with all of the fields that we collect for each individual case. That for a lot of us is going to be in our software or electronic in some form. Next slide. Okay, moving on to timelines that we talk about. We often will say the harvest period. This is for congenital, a rolling 4-year analytical window. And for us, this is twice a year. So it might be a calendar year, January to December, or a fiscal year, July through June. When you talk about like a spring analysis, that's a calendar year harvest period, or a fall analysis refers to a fiscal year harvest period. Harvest inclusion. Included in the harvest will be all operations with a surgery date within the harvest period. So within those 4 years, any surgery that took place will be included in the harvest. Not when they're admitted, not necessarily when they're discharged, but if the surgery took place within the harvest window, they're included. Now, there are lots of different ways cases can get excluded from analysis, but to be included in the harvest period, the cases will be anything with a surgery date within that 4-year window. Okay, our database version timeline is typically 3 to 4 years. This is when we will update definitions, specs, fields themselves, or add or eliminate fields, procedure codes, diagnoses codes, etc. That is why when we, if we find something kind of off within that 3 or 4 year window, we can give guidance on how to code it or to kind of interpret the field, but we cannot change definitions or how the field acts until the next version. And then other timelines, most recently, we've made updates to our stat scores, as we all know, and to the combination codes. So there's procedures within that make up a combination code. And over the past year or so, we've made updates to what is or isn't included in combination codes. Those may happen at different times, but when they're instated into analysis, that will encompass the entire harvest window, or harvest period, I'm sorry. Next slide. Okay, speaking of harvest. So when we talk about harvest, that is the process in which we submit our data to IQVIA or through IQVIA to STS for analysis. So the first step in that process is creating a harvest file. This is software specific. So if you're not familiar with that, talk to your vendor or any other data manager you know who shares your software. Then you're going to upload that file to IQVIA and then use the tools and reports in IQVIA to clean your data locally and resubmit up until the harvest deadline. Then at the harvest deadline, or shortly thereafter the harvest deadline, a snapshot is taken of the entire harvest window, the entire harvest period for your site. So that 4 years that we talked about. Then following that, the snapshot is sent over and analysis begins. And then after all of the analysis is complete, there's a report publication that's on the IQVIA site, and you also see the analysis overview document sent as well. Next slide. Okay, so when analysis occurs, a file comes in. So that's that snapshot that we're taking. Well, I'm not taking a snapshot. Then we're filtering it down to the primary procedure. So this is an important step to realize as well, because even though you're doing your best, most of us are doing our best to pick the primary procedure when we're entering our cases. That is also done once that snapshot is taken and sent over to STS. They're determining the primary procedure. That's particularly important because on the IQVIA platform, analyzed reports have the primary procedure picked sort of for you, regardless of what you've picked locally. All of those rules and exceptions are applied and they pick a primary procedure. Some reports are not analyzed, and those may not have the same primary procedure. If, for instance, you wanted to keep a different primary procedure than what would be the primary procedure based on the rules. So that's an important distinction. After picking the primary procedure, then the index operation is selected. Again, that's the first cardiac case of your episode of care. Then from there, the inclusion and exclusion criteria is applied. Again, that's explained in the analysis overview. And then finally, the analyzed report comes from that. Now, I don't know for sure. I'm not the one doing this. Of course, it's automated. I don't know if it goes exactly in these 3 steps. This is just easier for me to visualize, kind of going from small to big. So first you pick a primary procedure, then determine the index operation, then what is included or excluded from the entire report. Okay, next slide. Okay, so then just our updates, as Leanne mentioned, the training manual and FAQ summary was posted for October out on the STS website. And then one note that we've heard from several data managers, this is just sort of to be aware of while you're submitting 623 cases. This is new with version 623.2. The last known follow-up date, the follow-up date that you put in, likely your software, now has a rule that needs to be on or after the date of surgery to submit cases to IQVIA. That makes sense, I'm sure, to all of us when you really think about that, but it is a change. So if you're not accustomed to changing that or updating that when you're entering your cases, that would throw a critical error and not submit the case when you send it over to IQVIA. So be aware if you're getting those, that's what it is. Double check that field. Okay, I think that's all I have from us. Of course, we're here to help always. So send in your FAQs or emails as necessary. Leanne, I'll turn it back over to you.
Yep, thank you, Leslie. And we do have a couple of questions come in. Before we hop over to those, I just want to touch on the next upcoming webinars. Our next user group call is scheduled for November 7th at 12 p.m. Central, followed with our monthly webinar that's scheduled for November the 21st at 12 p.m. Central. So just mark your calendars. And as always, STS will be sending the reminder prior to those webinars. All right, let's jump back over to our questions. We had a question from Dave. So what's the difference between database date of discharge and actual date of discharge?
Sure. So database discharge is the end of sort of I shouldn't say that. The hospital, let's start there. Hospital discharge date is the date the patient leaves your hospital. That may be the same as database discharge date if the patient goes home. They leave your hospital and go home, database discharge date equals hospital discharge date. If the patient leaves your hospital and goes to another facility, then hospital discharge date is complete when they leave your site, but database discharge date cannot be filled in until the patient goes home or dies, hopefully not, or meets 183 consecutive days in acute care status if in an acute care center. Otherwise, if they're in another chronic care center, If their hospitalization continues, they come back to you, go back to the center, like in our example earlier. Database discharge date cannot be completed until they go home or die or have that 183 days of chronic care status. I hope that helps. That's confusing without a slide, but I hope that helps.
Yeah, let me know if you need me to go back to anything, Leslie.
Okay.
Yeah, Dave said a very informative session, so thank you, Leslie. That was amazing. We had another question. I just everyone, I shut off the chat. So if you can put your questions into the Q&A, the chat should no longer be available. Sorry about that. That was oversight on my fault, my side, guys. Heather wanted to know, isn't the follow-up 30 days post discharge, not surgery?
Isn't follow-up.
It's in the chat. Yeah, isn't the follow-up 30 days with discharge, not surgery?
Okay, it is. So follow-up, last known follow-up date can be anything. It's the last time you had contact with the patient, you knew that they were alive, you had or dead, you had some sort of knowledge of the patient's status. That could be in 5 years, that could be the day after surgery. It's just the last time you have a follow-up date. Readmissions have different timeframes, but for follow-up, it does not have to be a certain date. It could be the day after surgery, or it could be the day they leave your hospital. It's just the last time you have a status or followed up on the patient.
Yeah. Maggie was asking what the sequence number is to the follow-up date.
Okay, I'll look it up.
Yeah, I was pulling it up too. With that, along the same lines, Leslie, Nicole was asking, can this can be any follow-up with any specialty, or does it have to be cardiology, cardiac surgery specific follow-up?
Any specialty is fine. It can be, yeah, I mean, it's the last time you knew the status on the patient.
Okay. Marciela is asking, I thought the 30-day follow-up had to be 30 days from surgery, but you are saying that it can be 1 day after surgery. So we're talking about, I think you're confusing it with 30-day status,
Right.
mortality 30-day status, and then the date of last follow-up. So let me get the data collection form.
Date of last follow-up is sequence number 4995. And it's like last known follow-up date. This is on the demographic level, the patient level itself, not on an event level. Maricela's correct. 30-day follow-up, 30-day status needs to be 30 days after the operation. But follow-up date is just the last day which follow-up was made.
Sorry, I was just pulling up the data collection form. So, yep. So the initial question that we were talking about was date of last follow-up. And then 30-day status, MT30 stat is from surgery date, 30 days after surgery date.
Correct.
All right. Thank you. And then we had one question. Where is Appendix C located? I can pull that over.
Thank you.
So where is Appendix C currently located? The link in IQVIA links to the STS website, but not a specific place, and I've had a hard time locating it. So from the STS website, the quickest way to get there is through the Data Manager link located here. So just click Data Manager and then click on, you can either click on either one, but the path of least resistance is the data collection forms link. And this will bring you to the data collection forms page. Click on congenital heart surgery. And then the Appendix C analysis overview, everything is located under the current version, which we are currently operating under, is version 6.23.2. So here you have your training manual, your FAQ summary, your data collection forms, And then under additional resources, we have the data specs, the analysis overview, and the Appendix C in Word and Excel version. Also note in the analysis overview, the list of all the combination procedures is also located. It's now been moved into the analysis overview. So if you were looking for that document, that's also, can be found within the analysis overview. So again, everything's under the current version that we're operating under, which is version 6.23.2, and under additional resources. Can you share the location of the definition files you were showing to show follow-up definitions? Are you asking about the training manual, Dave? Yes, so all the definitions that would be located here under your training manual would be the training manual here. And so each of the variables and the definition for each of the variables, you can use, there's links here. You could use just to link over to the discharge readmission section, or you can use the table of contents, but everything is, all the definitions are outlined here. All right, and then still, if something's not clear, just submit an FAQ to Chastity and Leslie, and they will be happy to help you get any of those questions answered. And Becky, the only thing I noticed from the last Harvest submission was that when a patient dies after a successful discharge and the date of death is entered, the last date of follow-up must equal the date of death. IQVIA would not accept the date of when I found out the patient was dead. Is this the intention of this field? So thank you, Becky. I'll go back and look through and look at the criteria for that variable, Becky.
I think the answer is yes, though,
Yes.
because the patient, if you found out today that the patient died 2 weeks ago, your dead date can't be 2 weeks earlier than that
Sure.
field, right?
Yep.
So
That
the
is
last
true.
day you knew they were alive was the day they died, or dead, right? You knew their status.
Right.
Yes, so it's not the date I mean, it is the date you made contact, I guess, in the event that they were alive, but if they were dead, it's the date you know that they were dead. And I believe that we've clarified this before in the training manual. It's hard to explain.
Yeah. Perfect. All right. Okie dokie. I'm not seeing any additional questions. Again, next webinar is November 7th and November 21st. Not seeing any additional questions come in. Anyone else have anything they would like to update? Anything that I may have missed? Going once, going twice. All right. Well, I guess we'll end a little early, give you some time back on this beautiful day. Leslie, thank you for that education. I know you all get a lot of the same questions. It seems we've had a lot of turnover in our data manager community post-COVID. So it is nice to get back to the basics. It still helps me every time. So I appreciate you putting together this content. It was perfect. It was amazing. And if anyone has any questions post-webinar, please feel free to reach out to us. You can email myself here, or you can please, if you have any questions related to the platform or IQVIA platform or any report-related questions, please reach out to us at STSDB_helpdesk@sts.org. And then, of course, just reach out to us and we are happy to answer any questions that you may have. So with that, thanks everybody for joining today. Thanks, Dr. Meyer, Dr. Jacobs for hopping on and being here. We appreciate you guys taking time out of your day to join. Thanks, everyone. Hope you guys have a great rest of your week.